and personal experience with this. Let me just throw out some statistics that caught my eye and get your reaction to them. Between 2010 and 2021, the United States lost 26,000 independent pharmacies. 45 million Americans now live in pharmacy deserts where there is no pharmacy, local pharmacy, or any pharmacy within driving distance. That includes in my home state of Missouri. You know, Missouri, we've got 2 entire counties that have 0 pharmacies of any kind. 0. 2 whole counties. CVS, I note, this year announced plans to close 271 retail stores. Walgreens says over the next 2 years it will close 1,200 stores. So we're seeing mass consolidation. 3 companies, I think, control 80% of U.S. prescription drugs. What's the effect on patients from this mass consolidation and lack of access?
It's devastating. I'll say I have personally seen this with my patients where they're having to either figure out how to drive an hour or 2 hours even farther away to be able to pick up prescription drugs, especially for things that are emergent, like an asthma inhaler in particular. And this has just caused devastating effects and sometimes have landed them in the hospital or even worse. So it's definitely a huge problem, and also, results of, as you mentioned, the consolidation, the various stakeholders that are not being regulated, that there's not proper oversight over, including pharmacy benefit managers, as well as the pharmaceutical companies that enable incentives for those entities as well. We have a huge problem with our pharmaceutical supply chain in terms of who's controlling access, price, and availability of these medications.
Let me just ask you about that point because I think it's so important. Let's just stick on PBMs for a second. Is it a good idea, do you think, to allow PBMs to buy up independent pharmacies and other pieces of the medical supply chain? I mean, should PBMs be purchasing pharmacies and purchasing doctors' practices in some cases and purchasing hospitals or merging with hospitals? Is that kind of consolidation across vertical consolidation across the medical supply chain, is that a good thing for patients?
No, and we know this from various studies, including studies that we've conducted looking at patient outcomes. When that has occurred, outcomes on patients are worse. If outcomes for patients were actually better in terms of access, quality of care, and things like that, we would be having a different conversation. But instead, we're seeing the opposite. And in particular, it's because they're prioritizing kind of bottom lines. What can they do to be able to maximize profit instead of actually thinking about patient outcomes?
Let me read to you from a recent news article about private equity and their entry into the healthcare system. Here's a quote: "When private equity enters healthcare, closures are not side effects, they're the business model. Extracting value for investors comes at the cost of extracting access from patients." It seems like to me one of the big problems we have in our health system today in the United States is we've got a lot of companies and corporations who are rapidly consolidating and they're strip mining the American health system for their profits, but not for the good of patients. So prescription drug prices keep going up, up, up. Access to those drugs continues to decline. So what are some prescriptions you would give us as policymakers to address these problems?
I know the committee, and especially you as Senator, have been talking about reforms to various parts of the supply chain, including obviously pharmaceutical companies, but also PBMs, right, to actually address this issue around consolidation. Obviously, regulation of private equity, right, because to having oversight of these deals, which has been happening in some states to some extent, but usually after there is some harm that's occurring to patients. Being able to be proactive, to be able to stop the sort of consolidation, these merger and acquisitions, and be able to understand what the impacts are on patients before they happen, I think is most important, and that's going to require regulation. And also entities like the Federal Trade Commission to step in to actually ensure that anti-competitive practices are not moving forward.
I've always been a big believer in antitrust as an attorney, as a believer in a free market. I mean, a free market works best when there's competition, when there's free and open competition. That's what keeps prices down. That's what benefits consumers. And when you see the kind of consolidation we are seeing, whether it's on the pharmacy side, whether it's on the big pharma, the production of pharmaceutical side, I think it's really no surprise that we're seeing the increase in prices, but the decrease in care to consumers. And so you're right, this is why I believe one of the things we ought to do immediately is prevent PBMs from buying up every aspect of the supply chain. Why should PBMs be able to own all these pharmacies? Why should they be able to start buying doctors' practices? We don't allow that in other aspects of our economy. Why should we be allowing it in healthcare? I think it's nuts. And I think it's time we actually, in our competition policy, started putting patients first. So thank you for the work you've done on this. Thanks for the rest of the panel, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Kim.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Crowley, I'd love to start with you. Just a quick question here. Would you say that the U.S. right now is the leading country in the world when it comes to biotech?
Senator, yes, we are the leading country in the world when it comes to biotechnology, but China is a rising competitive threat and a rising threat in general.
So in that case, so right now you can say definitively we are
We are in the lead
leading
today.
country. What about in 10 to 20 years from now? Can you make that same definitive
No,
statement?
not at all. In fact, it's a lot sooner than that. If you look at the National Security Commission report on emerging biotechnology, they have 49 recommendations to strengthen, maintain, and advance our lead in biotechnology. But we need to act boldly, and we need to act today. We believe within 2 to 3 years we can lose this. To give you some perspective, 10 years ago, about 2% of the innovative medicines being developed in the world came from China. A decade later now, it's about 25%.
Mr. Schiller, I mean, what we just heard from Mr. Crowley saying, even within 2 to 3 years that we could be losing our competitive edge here. I really think that the key here is not just what are the steps that are going to move us forward, but for us as a committee and as a country to embrace the urgency of this moment. I guess I want to ask you, are we operating with the level of urgency as a nation, as a government, as an industry that we should be at this point?
Senator, thank you. I don't think we are. And I think there's more we can be doing to try to ensure that the regulatory system, the ecosystem, allows for faster trials getting off the ground in the United States so that less of that research is moving out to other countries.
Mr. Macauer, you talked about, Dr. Macauer, you talked about this in terms of the challenges that we're facing, whether it's about reviewers and turnover on that front, or just resources writ large. I guess I want to ask you in terms of the FDA, does the FDA have the resources and the staffing needed right now to be able to meet this urgency that we've been talking about in terms of our global lead on biotech?
Thank you for the question, Senator. We could do much better. We absolutely should be refilling vacancies one-to-one. We absolutely need to deploy the latest technologies in reviews. Most importantly, to be competitive, we need to reinforce and deeply invest in our U.S. scientific and clinical infrastructure. That science has propelled innovation in this country, and it's absolutely important. We also need to support intellectual property and stand behind our U.S. innovations and fight infringing entities who are coming mostly from China that are utilizing our intellectual property to create their businesses. So these are the types of things we can do to support our competitiveness in this effort.
No, and I think we absolutely need to be taking that on. But when it comes to the FDA, I will say, when I hear what you're saying when you're saying we need to backfill one for one,
Yep.
Based off of what's happened. But I also just want to make sure, like, we're not just trying to tread water here.
Right.
You know, we're really trying to figure out how we can move forward. Like everyone here, I feel like none of you would say that we're on the trajectory that we need to be in terms and the urgency that we need to be on. So I just urge this committee to, yes, we can think of some steps and we can ask this question, are we on the right path? And backfilling one-to-one, that can be part of it. But it's not just about are we on the right path, it's are we with the right velocity that we're trying to be moving forward on. And, Mr. Schiller, just wanted to go back to you. I mean, one thing that could really unlock some of this velocity is about AI and utilizing that to be able to supercharge our research. What regulatory or statutory changes do you think are necessary to encourage the innovative use of AI?
Some of the most exciting uses of AI in drug development involve reducing the time, the expense of drug discovery, and getting compounds into clinical trials. And if we can find ways to move from that process into first-in-human studies more efficiently and move from computer trials to human trials, that would help substantially. And then leveraging AI as a tool within our clinical trial infrastructure, I think there's much more that we can be doing where AI can help with decentralized and community-based trials, helping with trial recruitment. The more those tools are leveraged, the more competitive our system becomes.
Thank you. I really just want to hit home here as I conclude, that the one word here for me is about urgency. And I don't want to think about it just in terms of the urgency for economic gain or the urgency for geostrategic leadership. I thought, Mr. Crowley, your opening of your testimony, it was about the urgency of a dad, an urgency of a parent, And I hope our nation moves with that same level of urgency and speed that we would as a parent trying to save the lives of our children. And this is really, sometimes it gets lost in this talk about just industries and whatnot. But what this really should be about is about saving lives and the ability for our country to save millions of lives around our country and around the world. And with that, I'll yield back.
I defer to Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to take the thread of what Senator Kim was just saying about the urgency of a parent caring for a child, and just note the moment that we're in right now in day 29 of a shutdown. And I thought you, Dr. Ramachandran, really helped bring out that the numbers of people that we're talking about who won't be able to afford their health insurance, and when they shop on Saturday, or when the opening period of shopping for Affordable Care Act marketplace plans, they're going to have a real shock. And I worry on both sides. I so support the biotechnology innovation that's going on across the country in my state. I want to talk about that with you, Mr. Crowley, in a moment. But we have an opportunity here to act, to bring some relief so that parents can afford to get health care for themselves and their children. And I just wanted to emphasize that. Now to the topic of today's hearing. Wisconsin is a national leader in biohealth, thanks to our investment in strong research institutions, advanced manufacturing, workforce training, and industry partnerships. According to the 2024 Wisconsin Biohealth Economic Impact Report, the industry supports about 141,000 jobs and generates over $37 billion in total annual economic impact. And because of the strong foundation in my state, in 2023, a consortium led by BioForward, a member of Bio, was selected as a regional tech hub focusing on personalized medicine and advancing the adoption of the next generation of theranostics. Mr. Crowley, in your testimony, you mentioned that each part of the biotech ecosystem is integrated and complex. And so I wonder if you could speak to the importance of funding programs like Wisconsin's Biotech Hub that deals with all of the ecosystem parts.
It does. Thank you, Senator. Again, Wisconsin is one of our great states in biomedical research, as you indicated, anchored in great academic institutions and entrepreneurial mindset. So I think it's a great example for the United States and many of our other states as well. When it comes to funding, these state-funded programs that oftentimes complement private capital, also oftentimes complement federal capital, are incredibly important. When you're starting a company, it's a very risky environment, and capital markets wax and wane. So oftentimes these state funds can provide the capital where there's either failures in the capital market or the technology is simply too early. And if you look at Wisconsin, some of the therapeutic areas that you alluded to that they're developing are areas where they have expertise coming out. And that's one of the things you see with many states. Not everybody's trying to do everything. Some are experts in cell and gene therapy, again, coming from their entrepreneurial base, coming from their academic institutions. So yes, I think these are incredibly important programs and a part of the ecosystem, but important to recognize the vast majority of capital that goes into drug development is private capital.
In April of this year, and you referenced this report, Mr. Crowley, the National Security Commission on Emerging Biotechnology released an action plan with a number of recommendations regarding the future of the field. And the report aims to ensure that the United States remains the global leader. We've seen this playbook before with China. They make a sector a strategic priority, and it can achieve global dominance in that space if left unchecked. We cannot let that happen with biotechnology, which is so critical to our public health and economic strength and national security, and for the moms and dads with children that they love so much. So can you expand upon the dangers of losing our global leadership within role within biotechnology? And what would a world where China leads in biotechnology look like?
I think it would be a very different world from the one we have today for the health and safety of our entire population. We need access to our medicines, so we need to think about where are they made. At the end of the day, Senator, I don't care where my kids' or grandkids' toys are made. I really care where our medicines are made. So we need to act with great urgency, as Senator Kim said, to look at biomanufacturing. Where are we making our medicines? How are they distributed? And ultimately, where is the research and development coming from? So this is incredibly important. We must win in biotechnology. We have the lead today. If we don't continue to act, it'll be a very different world.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Great witnesses, great panel. A lot of agreement around this life cycle of innovation, beginning with research through the NIH and our research institutions on to improvements in the validation and approval process, onto strategies that can increase production, especially production here at home. So I appreciate this. I'm very proud to represent Virginia, which is a leader in biotech research and innovation. When I was a city councilman and mayor, I helped found and then grow the Virginia Biotech Research Partnership Authority, which has grown investment and interest in biotech in Virginia and the Richmond region. This continued investment has done very well for the Richmond region where I live, but across the state. The Richmond-Petersburg region received an advanced pharmaceutical manufacturing grant through the first an ETA Tech Hub designation through the CHIPS Act, but also $52 million for advanced pharmaceutical manufacturing through the American Rescue Plan. And that has really enabled the Virginia biotech industry to take off. Just in the last few months, we've been benefited by announcements for several major projects in Virginia. AstraZeneca, Eli Lilly, and Merck are making massive investments, but our ecosystem also includes small innovators that are doing great. We're celebrating the 20th anniversary of the Genelia Farm campus of the Howard Hughes Medical Research Institute in Loudoun this month. So there's a lot going on in Virginia. I wanted to ask about one part of this innovation chain. So beginning with research through approvals and innovation through production. In the 1980s, there was a set of lawsuits filed against vaccine manufacturers over the DPT vaccine, diphtheria, pertussin, tetanus. And those lawsuits threatened to shut down the manufacture of those vaccines in the United States. And so Congress created the, let's see here, the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, which has been a substitute for the traditional tort system and created a no-fault mechanism for those who do suffer side effects from vaccines to receive compensation. By my way of thinking, that's worked pretty well. It has not only worked well to provide prompt recompense to those who do have side effects, it's also done pretty well in enabling us to collect data so we can see how many successful claims per million vaccines there are in DPT and in measles and in COVID. And tracking that data turns out to be really helpful to us as well. I'm very worried that Secretary Kennedy has flirted with the idea of eliminating the program and restoring us to the status quo ante from the 1980s, where it's just like a litigation free-for-all against vaccine manufacturers. And I worry if we went back to that, we would see the same that we were seeing in the 1980s, vaccine manufacturers saying it's just not worth doing it. And then we would lose the ability to actually produce these vaccines here at home. I appreciate that there's uniform acceptance and support for vaccines, safe, reliable vaccines on this panel. How damaging would it be to the production of safe, reliable vaccines here on our home shores if we were to eliminate this vaccine injury compensation program? Dr. Ramachandran, I'll start with you.
It would be disastrous. In particular, manufacturers are very sensitive to what the government is asking for, right? What the regulations are, and so the market is really dictated in many ways, as many of us have talked about, by how government sets policies. And so the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program has provided that sort of security blanket for manufacturers to be able to safely proceed. If they anticipate any sort of disruptions to the market, either because of removal of the program, changes, to recommendations, changes to coverage in particular as well, they will exit the market. And so we're seeing right now across different states some efforts from manufacturers to say, can you make sure that we can still have a place to be able to provide vaccines for your constituents? But at a federal level, that has a much more broad impact and does not provide them security. And for patients, ultimately, that means they won't have access to the vaccines that they need, and we will have too few choices to offer them, and the possibility of infections that we thought were gone coming back again, potentially.
If I could ask, are there any other members of the panel who'd like to weigh in on the notion of what would happen if we eliminated the vaccine injury compensation program? Dr. Kesselheim.
Yeah, I would say it would be extremely damaging. One of the special things about vaccines is that we need confidence in vaccines so that a large number of healthy people take vaccines to prevent the diseases from spreading and from infecting people who therefore, who have problems with their immune systems and can't take vaccines that are at risk for it. And so we really need there to be confidence in vaccines so that healthy people take them, and we need there to be a vibrant manufacturing supply of them so that there can be vaccines available to people who need them, and so that we can help prevent the diseases that the vaccines have been extremely helpful in preventing.
I'm over time, but any significant disagreement among the other three panelists to what the first two witnesses have said?
No, I'm in full agreement, Senator. It would be devastating. It would harm many, many people. The system has worked well. We should strengthen and preserve it.
Great. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Senator Hickenlooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank all of you for not just being here, but for all the work that you've done. Mr. Mackauer, let me start with you. In your testimony, you identify several recommendations which you believe would help continue American leadership and dominance in biotech. Your testimony highlights the need for the FDA to fully leverage predetermined change control plan policy that was enacted by Congress in 2022. I worked with Senator Braun on that. We need to make it easier, not harder, for medical devices to grow with the changing landscape of technology. So Dr. Mackauer, what specifically do you think is preventing this policy from being fully leveraged within the FDA?
Thank you for the question. Thank you for the question. Specifically with respect to predetermined change control, we're really talking about medical devices where they're utilizing AI and other types of machine learning, where there's potential for change for the software subsequent to the initial review, but those things can be anticipated. This is only going to increase as we utilize these technologies. And really, AI is an enabling technology to allow for better access to healthcare at lower cost for Americans. So it's very important for us to find ways of using predetermined change control and other means to allow for AI to play a bigger role in healthcare.
Great, I appreciate that. Dr. Kesselheim, in your testimony, you discussed the importance of breakthrough drugs being available to patients at fair prices, especially for those drugs which benefit from government investment in their development. The Medicare Drug Pricing Negotiation Program, which was passed in the Inflation Reduction Act, is an important part of getting treatments to patients at a fair price. Your testimony noted the negotiations resulted in discounts of 38 to almost 80%. This is a huge drop. It's just a reflection of how much we've been overpaying relative to what the rest of the world is paying. When we were trying to pass that bill, we heard horror stories from the industry about how the negotiation would kill the ability of pharmaceutical companies to develop new drugs and continue their research and find the capital for that research. Can you explain how the negotiation is working and the impact it is having or not having on the ability for pharmaceutical companies to continue their research?
Sure. I think that in the first year, the negotiation process seemed to work very well, and as you said, achieved meaningful reductions in prices that, by the way, even those reductions in prices are not as low as the prices for those brand name drugs in other countries. So
you don't get everything.
Yeah, there is still room to move in terms of the negotiation, and we'll see how the second year goes. But I would also say that none of those dire warnings have come to fruition yet. I think by virtue of any measure that you look at of innovation, number of mergers and acquisitions in the last couple of years, amount of venture capital investment, even the things that that the companies are saying to their investors at investor meetings, everybody seems to say that that innovation, there have been no changes in the innovation as a result of the Inflation Reduction Act, and in fact, investments have increased those first few years afterwards.
But I think it's becoming a bipartisan issue. I think that there's a general recognition now that it's not Biden's plan or it's not Trump's plan, it's our plan going forward. Mr. Crowley, obviously robust funding for the National Institutes of Health has helped drive innovation in terms of biomedical innovation. The first 2 shingles vaccines were developed in Colorado, which we're very proud about. Doctors studying Parkinson's at CU Anschutz were the first to use neuropixels, these special implants in the brain, to obtain data on how brain functions. The president's budget requests, the budget's request puts all that future at risk. There's a 40% cut in the research funding. Mr. Crowley, how would you describe the scientific risks of imposing a cut of this magnitude? And how can we make sure that we're maintaining our country's leadership and dominance in this area?
Yeah, again, Senator, we think the NIH plays an incredibly important foundational role in basic research and development, and something we should continue to fund and support. So that's something our industry broadly supports. And again, when we do that at the NIH, it encourages then the university research. It promotes research for startup biotech companies where, again, more than half of all new medicines originate. So we've got to strengthen that part of the virtuous circle.
Sequence of miracles. I yield back to the chair.
I will defer to Senator Blunt Rochester.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. While I agree this is a vitally important topic, our U.S. biotechnology is critical. Even in the state of Delaware, this is a big focus for us. Delivering life-saving cures, that's the bottom line. I'm concerned that this moment is kind of overshadowing this really critical conversation that we're having here. Right now, as I sat here, I saw that the window shopping period for healthcare.gov has opened up, and families right now are opening this website and seeing sticker shock for so many of them. I was literally, I'm sorry, I missed some of your testimony because I was on the phone with people in my state, whether they are from community centers, whether they are government officials. Our food bank is coming in later. One of our community centers said they literally ran out of food yesterday, and this is before we make choices with what happens with the SNAP program, things that make us healthy, eating good, healthy food. And so to the witnesses, I thank you for your testimony. I am looking forward to a real robust conversation on how to make sure that our country is strong, both our health, our national security, our agriculture, because biotechnology is really connected to all of that. Dr. Ramachandran, I want to start with you. With the president just leaving China, I think it's important to highlight that China is closing the innovation gap by strategically investing in biotechnology. In 2021, China released their 14th five-year plan, which laid out a whole-of-government blueprint to becoming a global leader in biotech. It is one of their strategic priorities as a country for healthcare, for agriculture, and for energy. Can you highlight a few of the specific priorities in that five-year plan?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. And you're absolutely right. In that plan, China made very strategic, targeted investments at every point of drug development, manufacturing, and delivery in order to enhance their role in our global biomedicine system, biomedical research system. In particular, for R&D, like the early stage research, what NIH typically funds, they wanted to hit a target of 7% annual increases over the five-year period, and actually have far exceeded that over time. They've also put in several grants in not just for early stage research, for clinical trials, to be able to have operations that would host clinical trials for companies that are based in other countries as well, and also prioritizing domestic pharmaceutical companies and domestic manufacturing. A lot of public investment that went to prop up small biotech that's in China, as well as manufacturing facilities. So really at every stage of the pipeline, China decided to put in a lot of investment, and we're seeing returns from that. They're obviously now a key player in terms of medicines that we have here. About a third of medicines that are new in the United States come from China, at least the products. And on top of that, generic medicines, obviously, several of them come from China as well. So they've positioned themselves to be a key global player, not just for themselves, but also the rest of the world in terms of biotechnical innovation.
I have a question for the panel, and it's just a yes or no. Have you seen in our country a comprehensive plan that's as strategic as this one in biotechnology for this country? Just yes or no?
No, Senator.
No?
No.
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 Thank you. That answer is because we don't have one. And I think watching and I'm just going to run down the cuts in research right now, the lack of focus on clinical trials and pulling away, getting rid of scientists and cuts to our institutions, our academic institutions, the talent pool that we need, the workforce, and shuttering agencies and getting rid of grants. I don't think that's a recipe for us to be a global leader in biotechnology. Do you? Anybody? Again, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this very important hearing, and I am really looking forward to continuing this dialogue because this is vital for our health, our national security, really for the world. I like what you said, Mr. Crowley. I don't mind if China makes our toys. I don't want them making our medicines. Thank you. I yield back.
Senator Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Totally agree with Senator Blunt Rochester and on that note. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for hosting this important hearing, such a incredibly important topic, and appreciate the feedback that we've already received from so many of you today. Indiana is a thriving hub for biotech innovation already. We have more than 3,200 life sciences companies. They directly employ about 70,000 Hoosiers in my state. The average salary is about $148,000, and the total payroll is about $7.4 billion for Indiana. IU, Purdue, and Notre Dame bring in over $1.6 billion in research funding annually. And Hoosier biotech companies are leading the way in orthopedics, neurology, radiopharmaceuticals, cancer research, regenerative medicine, and therapies for metabolic disease. In Carmel, for example, which is just north of Indianapolis, MBX Biosciences is developing a treatment for a rare hormone disorder. In West Lafayette, On Target Laboratories created the only FDA-approved imaging agent that helps surgeons better detect lung and ovarian cancer. And in Indianapolis, Ossium Health is producing bone marrow for leukemia patients. And those are just a few of the success stories that we have in our great state. Mr. Schiller, how can the FDA make it easier to build more biopharmaceutical manufacturing facilities in the U.S. like the ones that I just mentioned? I know Senator Tuberville mentioned the FDA's pre-check program, but what else can we do?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I think there are a few things FDA can be doing. One is using the new advanced manufacturing designation program that Congress recently passed and enhancing the benefits to participating in that, so making designation more of a tool for streamlining review. It can also be updating regulations to make it clearer how advanced manufacturing facilities can comply with some very outdated regulations that were written for older conventional techniques. I think there's also things that Congress can be thinking about, perhaps setting up a strategic stockpile of manufacturing capacity where investment in some of those upfront startup costs to building could then result in the United States obtaining rights to some amount of agile manufacturing capability that can be used in the case of a national emergency or a drug shortage.
I recently wrote a letter to the FDA urging them to step up the inspections of drug plants in China and India. Inspections of U.S. plants should also be a lot faster than what they are. How can the FDA adopt a more risk-based approach to inspections, focusing on facilities with histories of compliance or quality problems?
Senator, I agree with you that parity in inspections between domestic facilities and those located abroad, particularly in China and India, is incredibly important, especially when you look at the rates of warning letters that go to facilities located in some of those jurisdictions. It's much harder for FDA, unfortunately, to get to those facilities, and oftentimes there are diplomatic challenges to doing unannounced inspections, which is something we've done domestically. FDA has been doing some work trying to increase the number of unannounced inspections. That would be helpful. Also leveraging the remote inspection tools that we used during COVID in order to, in a risk-based way, free up some inspection resources, particularly lower-risk facilities that have been inspected domestically, to free up inspectors to spend more time going to facilities that haven't been inspected more recently.
Mr. Crowley, IU, Purdue, and Notre Dame aren't just driving biotech innovation in Indiana, they're leaders for the whole country. But IP theft is a serious problem, and we see it in our own backyard. How widespread is IP theft, and how are we going to stop it?
No, it's very significant, Senator. The intellectual property, of course, is the foundation of a lot of what we do and the ability for us to fund. And, again, there's a reason why Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8 of the United States Constitution included intellectual property protections. We're seeing increased espionage and theft from our global rival with China. We need to stop that. We need to support our law enforcement agencies, the FBI, our intelligence community to stop that. We have enough trouble with the relatively fair competition in the plan from China. We need to strengthen the intellectual property protections, and that includes not just the threat from outside the United States, be it China or elsewhere, it's a threat from within. Policies, proposals, proposed legislation that would undermine intellectual property would be cutting the foundation of a lot of the capital that runs into biotechnology that's so needed for our cures.
Thank you. Great conversation. I yield back.
I will defer. Oh, sorry, Senator Hassan, your turn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that very much. I appreciate this hearing and our witnesses. I'll associate myself with Senator Baldwin's and Blunt Rochester's comments about the moment we're in and the opportunity to take action to make health insurance significantly more affordable for our constituents and make sure they get the care they need. Dr. Ramachandran, drug-resistant superbugs are on the rise across the world. Each year, tens of thousands of Americans die after being infected by superbug bacteria that have evolved and outsmarted the antibiotics that we've used for decades. In order to combat these superbugs, it's critical that we support the development of antibiotics that are truly new and different from our existing options. How can Congress target our investments to ensure that we're investing in antibiotics that will perform better than the status quo?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. And this is very much tied to the current moment that we're in right now in terms of where we're supposed to be putting our dollars and also our resources to be able to address the global crisis of antimicrobial resistance that is also hitting our shores here. In particular, the big sort of roadblock that we're seeing is actually finding novel compounds, novel treatments to treat drug-resistant infections. Most of the new antibiotics that have come through the pipeline and have been approved by the FDA are usually different sort of versions of existing antibiotics, which means that resistance will happen faster amongst patients that have drug-resistant infections. And this is a problem because we're just not seeing new options really coming onto the market. And that's oftentimes because of a lack of drug discovery investment from the federal government and the need for not just NIH funding, but also CDC funding to do that surveillance to identify drug-resistant infections in the first place so that we can be able to do that early stage research to find new compounds to address the crisis that we're seeing.
Thank you. So more investment and more CDC action and surveillance. Okay. Dr. Kesselheim, biosimilar drugs are generic versions of complex medications such as cancer drugs and drugs to treat autoimmune diseases. When a biosimilar drug enters the market, it's often half the price of the comparable brand name drug. However, brand name drug makers often block these low-cost alternatives from getting to patients by filing for dozens of frivolous patents, and by doing so, they force patients to continue to pay their high prices. What policy changes can Congress consider in order to get patients access to these lower-cost biosimilar drugs more quickly?
Great. So, as I mentioned in my testimony, one of the things that Congress can consider are there are bills that are currently being discussed that would help reduce the thickets of patents that are grown up around these drugs, allowing legitimate innovations to be protected by meaningful intellectual property, but not allowing companies to build dozens and dozens and even hundreds of patents that prevent the entry of competitive biosimilar products that can lead to competition and lower prices. And then I would add to that, once a biosimilar drug is approved, then there needs to be efforts to try to ensure that patients are prescribed that medication, and that it can be and that when the science supports it, and it seems like the science is supporting it, that it can be made interchangeable with the original biologic product so that it can be automatically substituted at the pharmacy level. Those kinds of steps, I think, can help those lower cost, helpful biosimilar products make impact in patients' lives.
Thank you. Mr. Crowley, advances in genetic screening and the production of synthetic DNA have the potential to cure deadly diseases and make Americans healthier. However, there are also serious risks. If these technologies end up in the wrong hands, they could be misused to produce dangerous pathogens or targeted bioweapons. What actions are your members taking to ensure that cutting-edge American technologies don't end up in the hands of bad actors or foreign adversaries like China?
Yes, and I appreciate and share that concern, Senator, particularly as a former intelligence officer
Right.
in the United States. This is a great threat as well. A lot of it is the unknown. So I think a good part of this, and this is part of our trade association's responsibility, is to educate. The only difference between doing good and doing incredibly wrong or evil with biotechnology is intent and purpose. So I think much of this lies on a lot of the self-policing, the education, the awareness, together with all the different ways in which our government can protect losing any of this technology to any foreign competitor, foreign rival.
Right. And part of it seems to me, too, is helping and working collaboratively with all of you to figure out what kind of guidelines and standards you already follow to try to prevent the misuse of your technology moving forward. And we'd love to kind of touch base with you about that and see what kind of standards
happy to collaborate,
might be
Senator.
applicable. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Hey, thank y'all for being here. I get to ask questions last. It's, I guess, polite, but it's actually selfish. Now I get to go as long as I want. Dr. Kesselheim, you said that investment has not fallen in biotech, and I think it was in relation to a question about the impact of the IRA. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, I said in relation to the IRA, there's been.
Now, let me ask.
Yeah.
Now, what about, because I hear from biotech, and I have Mr. Crowley respond in just a second, that that much of this offshoring to China has had a very negative impact upon biotech and investment in biotech. Would you include that in your statement that there's not been a decrease?
Well, I think it's very important to try to promote biotechnology development and manufacturing in the U.S. The question that I answered was related to the IRA and the
Now,
effect
can you
the IRA had.
differentiate the IRA from the impact of offshoring to China?
Right. So my response was related to the impact of the IRA, not related to
Have you seen a decrease in investment related to the offshoring of activity to China?
I think, as I said, I think that we have seen a movement in offshoring of companies' investment in manufacturing to China, and that's why I think that there need to be efforts to try to move that kind of manufacturing back to the U.S.
Mr. Crowley, can you actually tell it, and how do you parse it? How can you parse the impact of the IRA? And I'm asking totally, I don't know the answer here. Parse the difference between offshoring versus the IRA. Can you parse that? Has there been a decrease in investment in biotech?
I think, Senator, just to frame it, this has been a tough 4.5 years for emerging biotechnology. We can provide you as a follow-up lots of stats and statistics, the market value of companies, number of IPOs, number of programs being cut, and there are a lot of factors for that as well. With respect to the IRA, it's going to be really hard to understand how many programs would have been funded but for the IRA. It's hard to prove the negative, and I agree with Dr. Kesselheim. In the near term, generally R&D programs continue to be funded. It's the long-term impact that we worry about. I think the important fix, though, to the IRA, and what we're clearly seeing, and you could talk to any venture investor, private market investor, companies, large companies, as they look at their portfolio, is a shift away from small molecules to small molecules to large molecules because of the 9 versus 13
Has there been a shift in that investment?
disparity.
Can you see a discernible shift? Could Kesselheim say, oh my gosh, here, right now, I see there's been money moving towards the longer duration versus the shorter duration research?
I think it's more the research funding, particularly in the early stage, Senator, moving more toward large molecules away from small molecules and not following the science, particularly when small molecules are so important. You know, they cross the blood-brain barrier, as you know. They are the drugs most likely
I'm
to
gonna pause you for a
generic.
second, just because I got
course.
like a lot of questions, and even though I got a lot of time, I'm still gonna go. Mr. Schiller, you talk about domestic manufacturing. There was a generic drug plant in Shreveport recently closed, Dr. Reddy's, went back to India, left all their equipment. And the labor cost and whatever in the United States, they just cheaper to make it there and to ship it here. And I asked about robotics. And they said, well, you can do robotics, but that, and you mentioned this, the upfront cost to invest in robotics is so much that still you're better off going to India. That's what I was told. Is that true? Because you're advocating a reshoring of manufacturing, but is the cost of generics so little that even if we put in advanced manufacturing, we'll always be at a competitive disadvantage?
I do believe that is a problem, Senator, that the margins on many generic products have gotten so low that it's not profitable to manufacture many of them in the United States. And if you have some amount of upfront investment in advanced manufacturing facilities where the unit cost does go down, that can help. But finding the capital to invest upfront.
But if you
becomes a
found the
challenge.
capital to invest, would it level out over end if you amortize the investment over 20 years? I mean, has anybody put, finger to keyboard to put it in a spreadsheet to see if that works out?
Part of the problem is that the capital isn't sitting in an account to invest upfront to then amortize.
Dr. McHour, you're the one who kind of told me about this post-FDA marketing being a problem. Now, I talked to CMS regarding another aspect of this, and they told me that the FDA, and I think you said, it's not in front of me, but like 9 to 7 years between FDA approval and actually getting insurance coverage?
5.7 years.
5.7? That FDA uses a safe and effective standard, and CMS uses a reasonable and necessary standard, which is not, they kind of overlap, if you will. They're not entirely. Is that what the holdup is?
That's part of it. I think one of the complications is that reasonable and necessary has not really been defined. Whereas in a lot of FDA studies, safety and efficacy is agreed on and negotiated in the whatever trial or design, and it is the study's either met or not. It's really unclear how reasonable and necessary is fundamentally determined. The big challenge is that we have a system where these innovations can be created, proven to be safe and effective by the FDA, but there are substantial time delays even in accomplishing coding, going through the coverage decisions. It's just an extremely Byzantine and very long process. And during that time, investors are just funding these companies.
Now, is that something which reasonably could be addressed by AI?
I actually do believe so. AI could be exceptionally helpful. There needs to be process reform, for sure.
But that's against CMS.
That's
Mr.
on
Schiller,
CMS.
I'm going to ask you to comment on something that Dr. McHour said, because you were formerly at the FDA, but you may not know this. But I'll let anybody take a crack. That under the Biden administration, that there was a increased emphasis upon third-party review, but you say, Dr. McHour, that the FDA will then re-review. You don't actually say it, but you strongly imply it, and which defeats the purpose. Like, why in the heck would they re-review if you just third-party reviewed?
Thank you for the question, Senator. That has been an issue, and there has been substantial underutilization of the third-party review pathway because the benefit isn't that clear. And part of that is variable quality in the third-party reviews, FDA could be doing more to ensure that the third parties who come in and do the reviews are able to do it consistently, predictably. When there is inconsistency in those reviews, it also diminishes the incentive to do that third-party review. If, as a manufacturer, you can expect an easier process with the FDA rather than that third party.
So then, if it's the third-party review is inconsistent, there should be some sort of quality control on third-party reviewers, and you get rid of the people who are lousy and you keep the people who are good, huh? I mean, that's kind of like third-party review 101. Yes,
If I can step in on a couple of points that were made. One, in terms of the third-party review system, Mr. Schiller is correct that only about 2% of devices in recent years have actually undergone third-party review. It's a very small amount, but a government audit was actually done to actually show discrepancies in terms of vendor quality, which have forced FDA to actually step in to do a re-review. So there are things to address sort of efficiency. There were some recommendations that were put forward both to FDA and Congress on how that might be used. A key aspect of this is that the third-party review is actually funded from leftover funds from the user fee program. So it's kind of whatever is left is then goes to third-party review to be able to identify vendors to actually do that sort of process in the first place, which is not really efficient use of the funds, frankly. And on top of that, it's compounded by another larger issue in terms of the quality of pre-market evidence that is submitted by medical device manufacturers. We did a big analysis of all breakthrough devices that have been approved by the FDA as of 2023, and we found that several, about 1 in 10 medical breakthrough devices don't have any clinical testing to support them. So no sort of verification about safety and efficacy before FDA market authorization. And on top of that, most of those actually did not have post-market requirements to actually make sure that we actually can confirm safety and efficacy. For Medicare in particular, reasonable and necessary also means reasonable and necessary for their beneficiaries, which includes older adults. If you look at the clinical trials that support breakthrough device authorization, older adults are oftentimes not represented in those trials. So we're not even testing in them in the population that Medicare covers, which would also introduce complexities in terms of Medicare coverage. And this is why they've employed things like coverage of evidence development to be able to force
Let me stop you for a
manufacturers.
second, though. I was trained as a gastroenterologist, so you're going to follow this in a couple different ways. First, it seems like sometimes what you're saying, like it has to be proven for people over 65 as being a little anal. And I say that because if you're looking at whether or not something detects polyps in cancer, if it detects a polyp and a cancer in someone who's 55, it's going to detect it in someone who's 65. There's nothing fundamentally different between cancer shedding whatever it sheds in someone of a different age.
That's correct, and I can grant you that. And this is why we have FDA authorization, but that also is predicated on the fact that FDA then has the evidence, right, clinical testing that actually shows that sort of effect.
So, Dr. Makauer, we're hearing a defense of the FDA's process, and your testimony was actually calling for a reform, but that there's not adequate pre-market, there's not to prescribe post-market, which the FDA should prescribe it. Any other comments upon all that?
Well, I think that the legislation that's in front of Congress actually calls for accelerated coverage and concomitant studies that allow for these questions to be answered in that time frame. I agree with you that very often there's no difference between the studied population that was necessary for pre-market authorization and what the results would be in an older population. But it's certainly reasonable to look at that, and that's called for in the legislation that's in front of Congress now.
I could keep going, but they've called votes. I really appreciate y'all being here. We'll submit some questions for the record. Senator Mark Wayne Mullen, who could not be here, has a question for the record that we'll send to you, Mr. Crowley. You've been very helpful, though, and I look forward to, if any of you have continued input, please feel free to continue to give. For any senator wishing to ask additional questions for the records will be due at 5 p.m. Thursday, November 13th. Thank you again for being here.
credit cards while people worked out.
The suspect is 50-year-old Robert Brockington, Fairfax in D.C. December after the suspect